In 1117, the most brilliant philosopher in Paris fell in love with his student. She was 17, he was 37. Their affair was passionate, scandalous, dangerous. When her uncle discovered what happened, he sent men to Abelard's room in the night. They castrated him. What followed was stranger than the tragedy itself. Both lovers entered religious orders, separated forever, but their letters survived. Letters so raw, so honest, so shockingly intimate, they remained hidden for centuries. This is Heloise and Abelard, medieval lovers whose words have echoed for 900 years. Welcome to Hearts and History. Before we journey to 12th century Paris tonight, get comfortable. Maybe you're in bed, maybe driving home from work, wherever you are, you're about to hear something both beautiful and heartbreaking. If stories like this help you unwind, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is there. We love knowing our community spans different time zones. Now, close your eyes if you can. Let's travel back 9 centuries to a world of cathedrals, brilliant minds, and forbidden love. Paris, the dawn of the love that shook history. Picture Paris in 1115. Notre Dame is still being built, stone masons hauling blocks, the sound of chisels echoing across the Seine. This isn't the Paris you know, muddy streets, open sewers, but also something electric in the air, students walking everywhere, arguing theology in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, young men who've travelled from England, Germany, Italy, just to hear the masters teach. This is where Europe comes to think, where brilliant minds gather to debate God, philosophy, the nature of existence itself, and where our story begins. The cathedral schools are exploding with energy. These aren't universities yet, that's still decades away, but masters like William of Champeaux draw hundreds of students who pay handsomely to sit on hard benches and absorb wisdom. Theology is the queen of sciences, philosophy her handmaiden. Logic is a new obsession, using reason to understand faith. Some church leaders hate this, others embrace it. The tension crackles through every lecture hall. Into this world steps Peter Abelard, about to change everything, including his own life, in ways he never imagined. Abelard at 37 is already a legend. Born into minor nobility in Brittany, he abandoned his inheritance for books. Brilliant? Absolutely. Arrogant? Beyond measure. He's made enemies by publicly demolishing his former teachers in debate. Students flock to him anyway. His lectures pack venues to standing room only. He charges premium rates and gets them. Never married, never shown interest in women. His passion is purely intellectual, or so everyone thinks. He sees love as weakness, distraction from the life of the mind. Then there's Heloise, 17 years old. Here's what's wild about her. She can read Latin fluently, Greek too, even Hebrew, which barely any men could manage. In an age when most women can't read their own language, she's mastering 3 classical tongues. Raised partly in a convent at Argenteau, then privately tutored, her uncle Fulbert, a canon at Notre Dame, is incredibly proud of her, shows her off to visitors. This girl is my prize, he seems to say. Look what education can accomplish. He has no idea what's coming. Fulbert makes a decision that will destroy everything. He wants Heloise to have the finest education possible. Who better to teach her than the most famous master in Paris? He approaches Abelard with a proposition. Live in my house, tutor my niece, I'll pay you handsomely. For Abelard it's perfect. Free lodging near the cathedral school, good money, easy work. One brilliant student instead of a room full of rowdy boys. What could go wrong? He accepts immediately. The greatest medieval love story is about to begin with a business arrangement. Imagine the first lesson. Abelard arrives at Fulbert's house, expecting to find some reasonably bright girl who knows basic Latin. Instead he meets someone who can discuss Cicero's rhetoric, quote Virgil from memory, debate theological fine points in perfect syntax. This isn't just unusual for a woman, it's unusual for anyone. He's intrigued. She's clearly attracted to his reputation, his brilliance. There's something electric between them from the start. Not just intellectual respect. Something deeper, something dangerous. Picture Hans Holbein's famous painting if you know it. Abelard leaning over Heloise as she reads, their heads close together, her eyes lifted to his face. It captures something true about their dynamic. Teacher and student, yes, but equals too. Maybe for the first time in his life, Abelard has met someone who can match his mind. Someone young, beautiful, brilliant, completely absorbed in learning. The lessons stretch longer, the conversations grow more intimate. Fulbert notices nothing. He's thrilled his niece is learning so much so quickly. By winter 1115, the pretense of pure scholarship is crumbling. Abelard later admits his intentions were never honourable. He saw in Heloise's youth and beauty an opportunity for conquest. Her learning made the challenge more appealing, but something unexpected happens. He falls genuinely in love, not just with her mind, though that's part of it, with her, the person, the woman who argues theology one moment and laughs at his jokes the next, who sees through his arrogance to something vulnerable underneath. The stage is set for catastrophe, two brilliant people falling in love in a world that has no acceptable category for what they're feeling. Abelard can't marry without destroying his career. Heloise can't remain unmarried if they're discovered. The church officially frowns on clerical relationships. Society demands women be either wives, nuns, or whores. Their love exists in a space between all acceptable options. Winter deepens in Paris. In Fulbert's house, passion grows stronger than reason, and none of them, not Abelard, not Heloise, not Fulbert, understands what's coming. Dawn of love, the forbidden connection. Winter 1115. Something's shifted in that house on the Ile de la Cité. What started as lessons in logic and rhetoric has become, well, something else entirely. Abelard later admitted his intentions weren't exactly scholarly. Under pretext of study, he wrote, we spent our hours in the happiness of love. Happiness of love, that's what he called it. Not sin, not scandal, happiness. Picture this. Europe's most famous philosopher, 37 years old, supposedly focused only on intellectual conquest, and 17-year-old Heloise, brilliant beyond measure, hungry for knowledge. Their books lay open between them, Aristotle and Augustine, but their conversations had drifted into dangerous territory. Philosophy became flirtation. Debates about the nature of love turned into demonstrations. Abelard would pose a question about desire, and Heloise would answer with her eyes. She'd quote Ovid on passion, and he'd move closer to hear her voice. Medieval education was about memorization, repetition, strict hierarchy. This was something completely different. Two brilliant minds discovering they wanted more than intellectual connection. Canon Fulbert, meanwhile, congratulated himself on hiring such a dedicated tutor. His niece was learning so much. Here's what gets me about their affair. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that was definitely there. These two were intellectual equals in a world that insisted such a thing was impossible. Heloise could argue theology in 3 languages. Abelard had never met a woman who could match his wit. Their letters reveal someone who genuinely delighted in her mind before he desired her body. Our speech was more of love than of the books which lay open before us, he wrote later. But those conversations about love, they were still brilliant philosophy, just philosophy with a very personal application. Academic discourse was becoming foreplay. Spring arrived early that year. The Seine was running high. Students were restless, and behind the walls of Fulbert's house, Europe's most celebrated teacher was falling hard for his student. Abelard abandoned all pretense of academic distance. He wrote love songs for Heloise, performed them in taverns where students gathered. Paris buzzed with gossip about the famous philosopher's sudden interest in romance. Some thought it was just intellectual exercise, Abelard exploring the poetics of desire. Others suspected something more scandalous. They were right. While Fulbert attended cathedral meetings, his star pupil and famous tutor were rewriting the rules of medieval courtship. Conservative Paris was not ready for this. An unmarried cleric pursuing a teenage girl? Shocking. A girl of noble birth involved with her tutor? Unthinkable. But what really scandalized people was how obvious it had become. Abelard couldn't hide his infatuation. He'd mentioned Heloise in lectures, praising her intelligence to rooms full of male students. His love songs were spreading through the city faster than cathedral gossip. Market vendors hummed melodies he'd written for her. This wasn't some discreet liaison. This was public courtship by medieval Europe's most famous intellectual. People were talking, and medieval people talking meant trouble was coming. Their secret meetings intensified through the summer. Afternoons officially devoted to Aristotle became stolen hours of passion. Abelard would arrive early, staying late, finding excuses to be alone with Heloise. She was no passive victim of seduction. Her letters reveal a young woman fully aware of what was happening and wanting it desperately. "I preferred love to wedlock, and freedom to chains," she later wrote. Freedom to chains. Think about that. She saw marriage as constraint, their affair as liberation. Medieval society insisted women wanted protection, stability, legal status. Heloise wanted intellectual and physical passion. She was getting both. Then everything changed. Late autumn 1115, Heloise realized she was pregnant. In a world where unmarried pregnancy meant social death, where women were blamed for seduction even when they were victims, this was catastrophic. But here's what's remarkable. Neither of them panicked about the scandal. Abelard's autobiography reveals his first concern was protecting Heloise from her uncle's rage. Her letters show she was more worried about ruining his career than her own reputation. Even facing disaster, they were thinking about each other first. Medieval romance literature promised this kind of devotion. Actually finding it, that was something else entirely. Abelard moved quickly. He couldn't let Fulbert discover the pregnancy. The man's fury would be biblical. So he hatched a plan that was part rescue mission, part elopement, completely illegal. He'd smuggle Heloise out of Paris, take her to his family estate in Brittany, where she could give birth safely. This meant abandoning his teaching position, his income, his entire life in Paris. For a man who'd built everything on intellectual achievement, that's not a small sacrifice. But medieval or modern, some things matter more than career advancement. He was choosing love over ambition. In 1115, that was revolutionary. The escape happened at night. Abelard later wrote that he disguised Heloise as a servant, smuggling her out while Fulbert slept. Picture this: Europe's most famous philosopher and his brilliant student fleeing Paris like criminals, travelling muddy roads toward Brittany in November cold. No more comfortable house, no more library, no more academic prestige. Just two lovers and an unborn child heading toward an uncertain future. It took them weeks to reach his family home, but they made it. Heloise, pregnant and exhausted, was finally safe from her uncle's rage. The real test, though, was just beginning. Winter in Brittany was harsh but private. Abelard's family welcomed Heloise, though they must have wondered what their scholar son had gotten himself into. Here was this pregnant teenager, clearly noble-born, clearly educated, clearly the reason their famous relative had abandoned his brilliant career. But Heloise wasn't some helpless refugee. Even heavily pregnant, she impressed them with her learning, her wit, her determination. She studied throughout the winter, wrote letters in perfect Latin, debated theology with local priests. This wasn't some fallen woman seeking shelter. This was a brilliant mind temporarily displaced, preparing for motherhood while refusing to stop thinking. Spring 1116. Their son was born healthy and perfect. They named him astrolabe, after the astronomical instrument used for navigation. Think about that choice. Not Peter after his father, not a traditional Christian name, but astrolabe, a tool for finding direction when you're lost. These two intellectuals, Having risked everything for love, chose a name that reflected their situation perfectly. They needed to find their way forward. The baby's birth changed everything. They couldn't stay hidden in Brittany forever. Fulbert's rage was waiting back in Paris. And medieval society had very specific ideas about illegitimate children and the people who made them. Fury and forgiveness. A promise of marriage. Spring 1116. Heloise has been gone for months at Abelard's family estate in Brittany. When she returns to Paris with their newborn son Astrolabe, there's no hiding what happened. Her uncle Fulbert sees the baby, and the pieces click into place. His brilliant niece, the pride of his family, seduced, pregnant, by the man he trusted to educate her. The rage that follows isn't just personal, it's about honour, reputation, everything he's built. Fulbert explodes. This isn't just betrayal, it's devastation. He'd welcomed Abelard into his home, paid him handsomely, bragged about having Europe's most famous teacher tutoring his niece. Now, the whole arrangement looks like he's sold her off. The gossip is already starting. Canon Fulbert, the man who couldn't protect his own family, his standing at Notre Dame, his position in the church, all of it threatened because he trusted the wrong man. Abelard knows he's in serious trouble. Medieval society doesn't mess around with family honour. Fulbert could have him beaten, arrested, excommunicated, or worse. So Abelard makes his play. He approaches Fulbert with a proposal that seems reasonable on the surface. Marriage. Secret marriage. It would legitimize the child, restore Heloise's honour, satisfy family obligations. And the secrecy? That would protect Abelard's career. Everyone wins, right? Fulbert considers it. What choice does he have? But Heloise? She's furious. When Abelard tells her about the marriage proposal, she doesn't thank him, she fights him. This is the woman who quoted Greek philosophers who understood the implications of everything. Marriage would destroy him, she argues. Academic masters can't marry. His brilliance, his career, his entire identity, gone. And for what? To make her respectable. She'd rather stay his mistress forever than become the wife who ruined him. Her arguments get deeper, more philosophical. Heloise quotes ancient writers about marriage being the enemy of intellectual achievement. Cicero turned down marriage to focus on philosophy. Jerome warned that domestic cares destroy scholarly pursuits. She's essentially arguing that their love is too pure, too transcendent for legal contracts. The name of wife may seem more sacred, she'll later write, but sweeter to me will always be the word mistress. It's radical, it's shocking, and it's not working. Abelard won't budge. Maybe he's genuinely trying to do the right thing. Maybe he's just scared of Fulbert's threats. Probably both. He insists the marriage will stay secret. No one has to know. His career will survive. Her reputation will be saved. The baby will have a father's name. It's practical, sensible, the adult thing to do. Heloise keeps fighting, but she's outnumbered. Abelard and Fulbert have decided. Her voice, brilliant as it is, doesn't count. The arrangements happen quickly, quietly. A small ceremony, just family and essential witnesses. No celebration, no announcement, no joy. Heloise agrees because what choice does she really have? Medieval women, even brilliant ones, don't get final say over their own lives. She can argue, she can resist, she can make her case with philosophical precision. But at the end of the day, the men decide, and they've decided she's getting married. The wedding itself is bizarre. Heloise stands at the altar, knowing she's making a mistake. Abelard recites vows he hopes no one will ever discover. Fulbert watches his family honour get restored through a ceremony that feels more like a cover-up than a celebration. The priest blesses a union that everyone involved wants to pretend isn't happening. They exchange rings, they exchange promises, they exchange their futures for the illusion of respectability. Immediately after, Heloise does something stunning. She starts publicly denying the marriage ever happened. People ask if she's Abelard's wife. She says no, boldly, consistently, to anyone who will listen. She's protecting his career, yes, but she's also making a statement. This forced marriage doesn't represent her true feelings. If she can't have him as her choice, she won't pretend to have him through obligation. It's defiant, it's dangerous, and it drives Fulbert absolutely crazy. Fulbert realizes his plan is backfiring spectacularly. He wanted the marriage to restore family honor, but Heloise's denials make everything worse. Now it looks like she's either lying about being married, or he's lying about the ceremony. The gossip intensifies instead of stopping. His rage shifts from Abelard to his own niece. If she won't act like a proper wife, he'll make her life miserable until she does. The household becomes a battleground. What none of them understand yet is that this secret marriage, it's not solving anything, it's making everything infinitely worse. Fulbert's fury is growing, not subsiding. Heloise's defiance is becoming more dangerous by the day. Abelard's trying to protect his career while honouring impossible promises. They think they've found a compromise, but they've actually lit a fuse, and when it explodes, well, that's where this story gets truly brutal. Secrecy shattered, a marriage revealed. Here's where everything falls apart. Remember that secret marriage? The one Fulbert agreed to keep quiet about? Yeah, well, Fulbert's about to break that promise, and when he does, it's going to set off a chain reaction that destroys everyone involved. See, Fulbert thought the marriage would restore his family's honour, but keeping it secret, that just made him look like a fool. People still whispered about his niece and her philosopher, still smirked when they saw him. The secret wasn't protecting anyone anymore, it was eating him alive. Within weeks of the ceremony, Fulbert started talking. Not to everyone at once. He was smarter than that. A word here, a hint there, to his fellow canons at Notre Dame, to merchants in the market, to anyone who'd listen. My niece is married now, he'd say, properly married. To the great Abelard himself. He convinced himself he was setting the record straight, defending Heloise's reputation, but really, he was breaking the one condition Abelard had set for agreeing to marry her, and Abelard was about to find out. News travelled fast in medieval Paris. By the time word reached Abelard, half the intellectual community knew about his secret marriage. Students whispered in lecture halls, fellow masters raised eyebrows. His carefully protected career was cracking apart. But here's the really wild part. When people asked Heloise directly, she denied everything, flat out. Married? Me? Absolutely not. She looked them in the eye and lied, because she understood what Abelard understood. Admitting the marriage meant ending his career. She'd rather be called a whore than destroy his future. Think about that for a second. Fulbert was furious. Picture this guy's thought process. He'd finally gotten them married. The scandal should be over. His family's honour should be restored. But his own niece was undermining him, making him look like a liar, in front of the entire cathedral community. Every time someone congratulated him on Heloise's marriage, and she denied it, that was another humiliation, another slap in the face. He'd kept his end of the bargain. They were married, so why was she still protecting Abelard instead of acknowledging her husband? The betrayal cut deep. Fulbert's anger turned ugly. He started treating Heloise harshly at home. Harsh words became shouting matches. Shouting matches became worse. Medieval households had no privacy. Servants talked. Neighbours heard things. Soon everyone knew that Fulbert and his niece were at war. And Abelard. He was caught in the middle of this family nightmare he'd created. He'd married her to appease Fulbert, but the secret marriage was making everything worse, not better. The pressure was building on all sides. Something had to give, and it was about to. Abelard made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't stand watching Heloise suffer. couldn't bear the thought of Fulbert's anger escalating further. So he did what men of his era did when they needed to protect a woman. He sent her away to the convent at Argenteuil, the same place where she'd been educated as a child. She'd be safe there, protected. But to Fulbert, this looked like something else entirely. Like Abelard was trying to get rid of her, permanently. Like he was forcing her into religious life to escape his marriage obligations. Think about how this looked from Fulbert's perspective. His niece disappears into a convent, wearing a nun's habit, acting like she's taking religious vows. This wasn't protection, this was abandonment. Abelard had seduced her, gotten her pregnant, married her in secret, and now he was dumping her with the nuns. Classic powerful man move. Use a woman, then find a way to make her disappear when she becomes inconvenient. Fulbert's rage was building to a dangerous level, and he started planning something terrible in response. The convent made everything worse. Heloise might be safe behind those walls, but she was also trapped and visible. Everyone could see where Abelard had sent her. The whispers intensified. Did you hear? Abelard's woman is at Argenteuil now. Guess he's done with her. Poor girl, used by a philosopher and thrown away. The gossip spread like fire through dry grass. Fulbert heard every word. Each rumour was another wound to his pride, another reason to hate the man who destroyed his family's reputation and was now getting away with it. Abelard kept teaching, kept drawing crowds to his lectures, kept living his brilliant, successful life, while Heloise sat in a convent cell. That contrast ate at Fulbert's soul. Here was this arrogant philosopher who'd seduced an innocent girl, knocked her up, married her in secret, then dumped her with the nuns, and faced zero consequences. Still famous, still respected, still making money from his reputation. While Heloise paid the price for their affair, the injustice was unbearable, and Fulbert started thinking about justice, his own kind of justice. Winter was coming. 1117 was ending badly for everyone involved. Heloise was miserable at Argenteuil, trapped between her love for Abelard and the religious life she never wanted. Abelard was struggling to keep his career together while worrying about the woman he'd married then hidden away. And Fulbert was past anger now. He'd moved into something colder, more calculated. He was making plans, having quiet conversations with certain men, men who owed him favours, men who knew how to keep their mouths shut. Something dark was brewing. The signs were all there, if anyone had been paying attention. Fulbert's sudden calmness after months of rage, his careful questions about Abelard's daily routine, his interest in which servant had keys to the philosopher's lodgings. But nobody was watching Fulbert anymore. They were all focused on the scandal itself, the secret marriage, the convent drama, the philosophical implications. While they gossiped and debated, Fulbert was planning something that would end the debate forever, something brutal, something that would make sure Abelard never touched another woman again. The revenge was coming, a night of revenge, Abelard's downfall. Uncle Fulbert had reached his breaking point. Months of watching Heloise deny their marriage while living as a nun, it looked like Abelard was trying to get rid of her, forcing her into religious life to escape his responsibilities. That's how it appeared to Fulbert anyway. And the humiliation? The whispers throughout Paris about his niece, about his family's honour. He couldn't stand it anymore. So Fulbert made a decision, a terrible, irreversible decision that would change everything. He was going to make Abelard pay. Revenge required planning. Fulbert wasn't just angry, he was calculating. He knew Abelard's routines, knew where he slept, knew his habits. Most importantly, he knew Abelard's servant could be bought. A few coins, a few promises, maybe some threats. Servants talked, servants had access, and servants had keys. Fulbert gathered men he could trust, men who shared his outrage, or at least his willingness to act. They waited for the right night, no moon, quiet streets, when Paris slept deeply and questions wouldn't be asked until morning. The night came. Abelard's servant left the door unlocked as promised, then disappeared into the darkness. No witnesses, no interference. Abelard lay sleeping, probably dreaming of philosophy or theology, or maybe still of Heloise. He had no idea what was coming, no sense of danger creeping through his house. The men moved quietly through the corridors they'd mapped out in advance. They knew exactly where to find him. They knew exactly what they planned to do. This wasn't random violence. This was surgical revenge. What happened next? Abelard described it later with brutal honesty. They held him down and castrated him. That's the reality. No euphemisms, no gentle language. They cut away his manhood with deliberate cruelty, not to kill him, though he could have died from blood loss or infection, but to destroy him in the most intimate, humiliating way possible, to ensure he could never father children, never marry, never be considered a complete man again. When it was finished, they left him bleeding and broken. Imagine waking to that reality. The shock, the disbelief, the overwhelming pain, not just physical, though that was excruciating, but the mental anguish of understanding what had been taken from him. His body, yes, but also his future, his identity as a man, his place in society. Abelard had been the most celebrated intellectual in Europe, admired, envied, feared for his brilliance. Now he was what? A victim, a cautionary tale, someone to be pitied or mocked or quietly forgotten. Everything had changed in one night of violence. The pain went beyond anything he'd ever experienced. Physical agony that left him barely conscious, fighting infection, unsure if he'd survive. But worse was the psychological torment. Medieval society had clear ideas about masculinity. Men who couldn't perform, who'd been castrated, they weren't really men anymore. They were something other, something less. Abelard knew this. Everyone knew this, and everyone would know what had happened to him. The shame felt heavier than the pain, the humiliation more devastating than the injury. Word spread through Paris like wildfire. The brilliant Abelard had been castrated by his lover's uncle. Students whispered in the cathedral schools, merchants gossiped in the markets, nobles discussed it over dinner. Some felt genuine sympathy, but others saw justice, or scandal, or entertainment. Abelard had been arrogant after all. He'd seduced his student, gotten her pregnant, handled everything badly. Maybe this was divine punishment. Maybe he'd finally gotten what he deserved. The city that had once celebrated him now watched his downfall with fascination. Paris buzzed with speculation. What would happen to his students? His teaching position, his brilliant career? Could a castrated man continue as a philosopher? Some argued his mind remained intact, his intellect unchanged. Others claimed his authority was finished. How could students respect a master who'd been so publicly humiliated, who'd lost his manhood to an angry uncle? The academic world that had been Abelard's kingdom suddenly felt hostile, dangerous, impossible to navigate. Everything he'd built seemed to be crumbling along with his broken body. The attackers were caught and punished with medieval justice. Castration for castration, blinding for good measure. Fulbert lost his position at Notre Dame, but none of that helped Abelard. The damage was done, irreversible. Medieval medicine couldn't restore what had been taken. Medieval society couldn't forget what everyone now knew. Justice felt empty when your life had been destroyed, when your identity had been surgically removed, when you faced a future you couldn't imagine and didn't want. Punishment of his attackers changed nothing about his reality. Abelard made his decision from his sickbed. He would become a monk, not from religious calling, but because he had no other choice. Castrated men couldn't marry, couldn't have normal careers. The monastery was one of the few places where his condition might be, if not accepted, then at least overlooked, where he might find some dignity, some purpose. But first, He demanded something from Heloise. She had to take vows before he did. She had to become a nun permanently, irrevocably. Why? Maybe to protect her, maybe to punish her, or maybe both. One night of violence had ended their love affair and begun their separation. Not by choice, but by force. Fulbert's revenge had been complete, more complete than he probably intended. He'd wanted to punish Abelard for seducing Heloise. Instead, he'd destroyed two brilliant people and scattered the pieces across different worlds. Abelard would rebuild himself as a monk and theologian. Heloise would become an abbess, but they would never again touch each other, never again share a bed, never again whisper philosophy and desire in the same breath. The night of revenge had ended everything they'd been together. A solitary battle, devotion and despair. The wound healed, the shame didn't. Abelard lay in that bed for weeks, staring at the ceiling of his room, listening to students gather outside his window for lectures that would never come. The most brilliant mind in Paris had been reduced to not quite a man, not quite anything. The attackers had taken more than flesh. They'd taken his future, his identity, his place in the world he'd dominated for decades. What do you do when everything that defined you is gone? Abelard had three choices: flee Paris in disgrace, stay and endure the whispers, the pity, the slow erosion of his reputation, or disappear entirely. Enter the monastery, become Brother Peter instead of Master Abelard, trade his scholarly robes for rough wool, his lecture hall for a chapel, his intellectual debates for silent prayer. It wasn't just retreat, it was erasure. But here's what gets me about Abelard's decision. He didn't just want to hide, he wanted to control the narrative. If he became a monk voluntarily, he could frame it as spiritual awakening rather than social death. God's call, not man's punishment. The monastery offered him something the world no longer could: dignity, a chance to matter again, even if it meant starting over completely, pride, even in surrender. Then came the demand that broke Heloise's heart. Abelard sent word. He wanted her to take vows first. Before he entered his monastery, she had to enter hers, permanently. No trial period, no testing her vocation. Just done. Gone. Sister Heloise, sealed away from the world that had briefly let her love freely. Why did he insist on this? Control. If she committed first, he could follow without seeming weak. Imagine receiving that letter. You're 20 years old, you've lost your lover to violence, your child to separation, your reputation to scandal. Now the man you'd die for is asking you to actually die. Socially, romantically, intellectually, become a nun, not because God called you, but because he commanded it. Heloise had argued against marriage to preserve his career. Now he was demanding religious vows to preserve his dignity. Her friends begged her to refuse. Her uncle, the same Fulbert who'd orchestrated Abelard's mutilation, now ironically urged her to reconsider. The convent meant losing everything: her legal rights, her property, her freedom to ever marry anyone else. But Heloise had loved Abelard when he was brilliant and whole. She loved him now when he was broken and demanding. She said yes, one last act of devotion. The ceremony at Argenteuil convent. Heloise approached the altar wearing black, her face pale as winter. The abbess asked the traditional questions. Do you renounce the world? Do you promise obedience? Do you vow chastity? Yes, yes, yes. Each answer came quieter than the last. But then she spoke the words that witnesses never forgot. Lucan's verse about bringing down a noble husband. Her vows became poetry of grief. Only after receiving word that Heloise had taken permanent vows did Abelard enter the monastery of Saint Denis. He'd needed that confirmation first, needed to know she was locked away before he could lock himself away. The other monks welcomed Paris's most famous philosopher, but Abelard barely spoke those first months. He'd traded his voice, the thing that made him legendary, for silence. The contradiction must have been agonizing. Now they were both enclosed, both committed, both separated, not just from each other, but from the entire world outside monastery walls. No letters, no messages, no hope of reunion in this life. Abelard threw himself into theological study, trying to rebuild his identity as a religious thinker rather than a secular one. But the questions that drove his scholarship, love, desire, intention versus action, came from his own shattered experience. Heloise's struggle was different. She'd become abbess quickly, her education making her invaluable to the community. But she later admitted her heart remained entirely elsewhere. During prayers, she thought of him. During Mass, she remembered their nights together. Her devotion was real, just not to God. She served her religious community while privately serving a memory. The performance of faith hiding the persistence of earthly love. 10 years of silence. 10 years of wondering if the other was alive, well, thinking of them too. Abelard founded his own religious community, faced accusations of heresy, endured persecution from rivals. Heloise governed her convent, managed its finances, gained respect throughout Christendom. They built new lives on the ruins of their old ones. But the foundation was grief, and grief has its own timeline, its own stubborn refusal to heal. Separate paths, deepening love, the blossoming of letters. After the nightmare of that brutal night, silence, for nearly 10 years nothing. Abelard retreated to his monastery, broken in body but not in mind. He threw himself into theology, founding new religious communities, still brilliant, still controversial. Meanwhile, Heloise became abbess of the Paraclete. She governed with wisdom beyond her years, but inside, she was still 17, still completely his. Two people living separate lives, yet bound by something neither time nor holy vows could touch. Think about what those years must have been like. Abelard, the man who once commanded lecture halls across Europe, now seeking God in solitude. Every theological debate, every prayer, shadowed by what he'd lost, not just his body, his identity. Who was he without that arrogance, that certainty? And Heloise, managing convents and novices, her mind as sharp as ever, but her heart frozen in time. Both of them pretending their past was just that. Past, both of them lying to themselves about forgetting. Then, in 1132, something incredible happened. Heloise somehow got hold of a letter, not to her, to someone else entirely. Abelard had written his autobiography, Historia Calamitatum, the history of my calamities. He told their whole story to a friend, raw and honest, every detail, their affair, her pregnancy, the secret marriage, that horrific night. Imagine Heloise reading about her own life through his eyes, seeing herself reduced to words on parchment, but also hearing his voice again after a decade of silence. She couldn't help herself. After reading that letter, Heloise picked up her pen and wrote back. And what she wrote, it changed everything we thought we knew about medieval women. No polite nun's letter, no gentle inquiries about his health. She unleashed 10 years of suppressed passion onto parchment. She reminded him of every kiss, every touch, every moment they'd shared. She told him the truth, that becoming a nun had changed nothing, that her heart was still completely his. Here's what gets me about Heloise's first letter. Her honesty about desire. She wrote that even during Mass, during the most sacred moments, she couldn't stop thinking about their lovemaking. Her mind would wander to his hands, his mouth, the weight of him. She was an abbess, confessing to a monk that holy vows meant nothing against the memory of pleasure. Can you imagine the courage that took, or the desperation? This wasn't supposed to be what nuns thought about. Abelard's response was disappointing. Where she burned with passion, he offered theology. Where she confessed ongoing desire, he preached about transforming earthly love into heavenly devotion. Turn to God, he wrote. See our suffering as divine correction. Focus on your salvation, not our past. Maybe he was protecting them both from scandal. Maybe castration had genuinely changed his emotional landscape. Or maybe he was just scared of what acknowledging her words would unleash. We'll never really know. But she wouldn't let him escape that easily. Heloise wrote back, and this time she was even more direct. She reminded him that she'd become a nun only for him, not for God. That her religious devotion was a performance, that she'd taken vows out of love for a man, not love for Christ. Think about that confession. She was admitting that her entire religious life was built on earthly passion, that every prayer she'd ever said was somehow still about him. The most heartbreaking part, she told him she would do it all again. The affair, the pregnancy, the secret marriage, even the consequences. She'd rather be his mistress than any other man's wife. She'd rather share his disgrace than another's glory. This from a woman who was now one of the most respected religious leaders in France. Success, respect, authority, none of it mattered if it meant forgetting him. That's not medieval thinking. That's something else entirely. Slowly, painfully, their correspondence shifted. Abelard's responses remained careful, theological, distant, but they kept writing. The raw passion mellowed into something deeper, companionship, intellectual partnership, genuine care. They discussed the governance of her convent, questions of scripture, the proper way to conduct religious ceremonies. Two brilliant minds reconnecting, finding new ways to love each other within the constraints of their separate religious lives. It wasn't what either had hoped for, but it was something. Their letters became lifelines. Through words on parchment, they maintained a connection that their physical separation couldn't break. Heloise found ways to express her continuing devotion in discussions of abbey management. Abelard showed his ongoing care through detailed theological advice. They created a new kind of intimacy, minds touching across distance, heart speaking in the coded language of scholarly discourse. Not the passion of their youth, but love nonetheless, deep, enduring, unbreakable. These letters survived because they mattered, not just to Abelard and Heloise, but to everyone who read them afterward. Here were two people refusing to pretend their love had never happened, refusing to let religious convention erase what they'd felt. They insisted on honesty about desire, about the persistence of earthly love, even in holy settings. That honesty echoes across centuries, reaching us here tonight. Some loves are too real to be buried by time or circumstance. Nun and monk, the passion in letters. Around 1132, 12 years after their forced separation, Heloise somehow got her hands on Abelard's autobiography. Reading about their love story told from his perspective, she couldn't stay silent anymore, so she wrote to him. And what poured out was everything she'd been holding back. 12 years of suppressed desire, 12 years of pretending to be a holy woman, when inside she still burned for the man who'd been castrated because of her. Her first letter, it's absolutely devastating. Picture this. You're Abelard, trying to live as a monk, trying to forget your past, trying to focus on God. Then you get this letter from the woman you once loved. She's an abbess now, supposed to be beyond earthly concerns. But her words, they're on fire. She reminds him of their nights together, their secret touches, the way he used to whisper to her during Mass. She's not asking for forgiveness. She's asking why he abandoned her emotionally when she needed him most. Heloise writes with this raw honesty that's shocking even today. She tells him that during prayers, instead of thinking about God, she's thinking about their lovemaking, that the religious vows she took meant nothing because she only took them to please him, that she'd rather be his whore than any other man's wife. Can you imagine being Abelard reading this? The woman you lost everything for is telling you she's still completely yours, body and soul. Abelard's response is, careful, painfully careful. He calls her his dearest sister in Christ, instead of using her name. He thanks God for their suffering, says it brought them closer to salvation. He's trying so hard to be the spiritual guide she needs, instead of the lover she wants. But you can feel him struggling. Every word is measured, like he's fighting not to give in to what she's awakening in him. The restraint is almost more passionate than passion itself. Heloise wasn't having any of his holy detachment. Her second letter cuts deeper. She accuses him of hypocrisy, of forcing her into religious life while claiming it was God's will. She points out that he wanted her to take vows before he did, like he was making sure she couldn't escape if he changed his mind. She's brilliant, remember? She can see through his theological arguments to the human fear underneath. And she calls him on it beautifully and brutally. The philosophical battle in their letters is incredible. Heloise argues that intention matters more than action, that her love for him, even if it led to sin, was pure because it was freely chosen. Abelard counters that they must submit their wills to God's will. She's essentially arguing for romantic love as a form of worship. He's arguing for traditional Christian obedience. Neither is completely wrong, neither can convince the other. It's theology as lovers' quarrel, played out in Latin prose. What gets me about Abelard's letters is what he doesn't say. He never tells her he doesn't love her anymore. He never says the castration killed his desire. He never claims their relationship was just lust. Instead, he keeps redirecting, let us turn our hearts to God. Christ must be our only love now. It's like he's afraid that if he acknowledges what she's feeling, he'll drown in it too. The silence around his actual emotions is deafening. Heloise's third letter shifts the tone. She's still in love, still burning for him, but she starts asking practical questions about running her convent. It's like she realizes he can't give her what she needs emotionally, so she'll take what she can get, his intellectual guidance. Even this feels intimate though. She's saying, if you won't be my lover, at least be my teacher again. And slowly, carefully, he starts to respond to that version of their relationship. Their later letters become less personal, more theological, but even discussing liturgy and scripture, you can feel the undercurrent. When she asks about biblical interpretation, he answers with the same precision he once brought to seducing her. When he writes about the nature of religious vows, is he talking to all nuns or just to her? The subtext never disappears completely. Love finds a way to express itself, even through discussions of monastery rules and feast day observances. The tragedy of their correspondence is that they're both right and both wrong. Heloise is right that their love was real, that it shouldn't be erased or denied. Abelard is right that dwelling on it will destroy any peace they might find. She wants honesty about their feelings. He wants acceptance of their fate. She's asking him to validate their past. He's asking her to embrace their future. Neither can give the other what they need without losing what they've built. Their final letters, written near the end of Abelard's life, achieve something like peace, not the passionate reunion Heloise wanted, not the complete spiritual transformation Abelard hoped for, but recognition. They acknowledge what they were to each other, what they lost, what they've become. Heloise stops demanding he admit he still loves her. Abelard stops pretending their relationship was purely sinful. They find a way to honour both their earthly love and their heavenly calling. It's compromise, but it's also grace. Towards eternity. Last letters, last breaths. By 1140, Abelard was fighting for his intellectual life again. Bernard of Clairvaux, the most powerful religious figure in Europe, had marked him as a heretic. His theological writings, especially about the Trinity, were under attack. Students who once flocked to hear him now whispered about his dangerous ideas. At 60, scarred by castration and years of persecution, Abelard faced a council that could destroy everything he'd built. His brilliant mind, the same one that had seduced Heloise decades earlier, now struggled to defend concepts that seemed to threaten church doctrine itself. Meanwhile, 200 miles away, Heloise was becoming something unprecedented. As abbess of the Paraclete, she governed not just nuns, but an entire religious community that looked to her for spiritual and practical guidance. Bishops sought her counsel. Nobles donated lands based on her reputation alone. This was the same woman who'd once denied their secret marriage to protect Abelard's career. Now she wielded authority that most men of her era could only dream of. Her intelligence, once channeled into forbidden love, had found a new outlet that transformed medieval religious life. Their letters during this period reveal a profound shift. Gone were Heloise's passionate confessions about dreaming of his touch during Massa. Gone were Abelard's awkward deflections toward God. Instead, they wrote about liturgy, about scripture interpretation, about how the Paraclete should govern itself. She asked him detailed questions about religious practices for women. He responded with careful theological explanations. To outsiders, they looked like two religious leaders conducting proper correspondence, but underneath the formal language, something deeper flowed, a partnership of minds that transcended their physical separation. Heloise's questions weren't simple requests for guidance. They were intellectual challenges that forced Abelard to think differently about women's religious experiences. Why should nuns follow rules written for male monks? How could biblical passages about women's silence apply to an abbess who needed to preach? Her queries pushed him toward ideas about spiritual equality that were centuries ahead of their time. Through their correspondence, she was essentially co-authoring a new approach to women's religious life. Abelard, the great teacher, was learning from his former student turned peer, but Abelard's health was failing. The stress of constant theological battles, the physical trauma he'd endured, decades of monastic austerity, all of it was catching up. His letters to Heloise became shorter, less frequent. When he wrote, his handwriting looked shakier. Friends reported that he seemed exhausted during debates, slower to respond to challenges. The man who'd once demolished opponents with lightning-quick logic now paused mid-sentence, searching for words. Heloise could sense something changing in his tone, though he never directly mentioned his declining strength. The great mind was wearing out. April 21st, 1142. Heloise was reviewing accounts when a messenger arrived from Cluny Abbey. Peter the Venerable's letter was formal, respectful, but the news hit like physical violence. Abelard had died, peacefully, the abbot assured her, reconciled with the church, speaking of her with love at the end, but dead. The man whose mind had shaped her own, whose love had defined her life, whose letters had sustained her for a decade, gone. She read the words twice before they made sense. Then she set the letter down carefully and walked to her private chapel. What followed was the most dangerous period of Heloise's life. For weeks she barely ate. Her nuns whispered that she'd lost her mind with grief. During Mass, tears would suddenly overwhelm her. She'd start letters to him, remember he couldn't answer, and burn them half-finished. The same woman who'd built the Paraclete into a model religious community now struggled to get through each day. Some nights she couldn't sleep. Other nights she slept too much, hoping to dream of him. The intellectual partnership that had sustained her was over, but something in Heloise refused to break completely. Maybe it was her responsibility to the nuns who depended on her. Maybe it was pride in what she'd built. Maybe it was knowing that Abelard would have wanted her to continue their work. Slowly, painfully, she resumed her duties. She still wept when reading his letters, but she also preserved them carefully. She still felt the sharp absence of his mind, but she applied her own intellect to problems he would never help her solve. Grief became another challenge to master, like Latin grammar or theological debate. Years passed. The Paraclete thrived under her continued leadership. Heloise became known across Europe as one of the great religious figures of the age, consulted on matters far beyond her convent walls. But she never forgot. On the anniversary of his death, she fasted. She kept his letters close, rereading them until the parchment wore thin. When young nuns asked about love, she'd speak carefully about the dangers of earthly attachment, while her eyes suggested she remembered every detail of what she'd lost. By 1163, Heloise was failing. At 63, she'd outlived Abelard by 21 years. Her final letters show the same sharp intelligence, but also a weariness that went deeper than age. She'd spent 2 decades as a widow in everything but name, leading a community while nursing a love that never died. As spring turned toward summer in 1164, she knew her time was ending. Her last recorded words, according to the nuns who attended her, were a prayer that she might see him again. She died on May 16th, finally free to join him. Legend says she asked to be buried beside Abelard at the Paraclete. When her body was lowered into his tomb, witnesses claimed his arms opened to receive her, even after 22 years of death. Probably just shifting bones, but the story captured something true. Their love had outlasted castration, separation, heresy trials, and death itself. 900 years later, lovers still visit their shared grave in Paris, still leave letters asking for their blessing. Some loves, it seems, really are eternal, even when eternity begins with the most brutal punishment imaginable. Echoes in eternity, the legacy of a love story. Picture this. It's 1616, nearly 500 years after Heloise and Abelard died. A scholar working in dusty monastery archives stumbles across something extraordinary. Letters, written in Latin. Intimate, raw, passionate letters between a nun and a monk from centuries past. He reads them once, twice. His hands are shaking. These aren't just any medieval documents. These are windows into actual human hearts from an age we thought we understood. When he publishes them, the world isn't ready for what comes next. The reaction is immediate. Scandal. Fascination. People can't believe medieval lovers wrote like this so openly about desire, about their bodies, about refusing to repent their passion. These letters shatter every assumption about the Middle Ages being sexless and cold. Suddenly everyone's reading them, copying them, passing them around like forbidden contraband. Because here's the thing, Heloise's voice doesn't sound like it's from 900 years ago. It sounds like someone you might know, someone who refuses to apologize for loving completely. That's what makes people obsessed. Writers across Europe lose their minds over these letters. Alexander Pope writes his famous poem Heloise to Abelard. Rousseau draws inspiration for his novels. The Romantics claim them as spiritual ancestors. But it goes deeper than just literary influence. These letters basically invent the template for how we write about romantic love. That idea of love being worth any sacrifice. That comes from Heloise. The notion that passion can be spiritual, not just sinful. That's Abelard's theological wrestling. They're literally shaping how we think about relationships, centuries before we're even born. For historians, these letters are pure gold. They reveal what medieval people actually thought about sex, marriage, women's education, religious life. Not what the church said they should think, but what they genuinely felt. Heloise's arguments against marriage, revolutionary for any era. Her insistence that she'd rather be Abelard's lover than his wife because love should be freely given, not legally obligated. That's challenging social norms in ways that wouldn't become mainstream for centuries. She's basically writing feminist theory 800 years early. Through their pain, we understand an entire civilization's heart. Their story reshapes how people think about love itself. Before these letters become famous, most literature treats romantic love as either courtly game or dangerous sin. But Heloise and Abelard show something different. Love as both transcendent and embodied, spiritual and sexual, worth everything even when it destroys everything. They prove that medieval people weren't emotionally different from us. They felt just as deeply, wanted just as fiercely, suffered just as completely when torn between what they desired and what society demanded. Their letters become proof that human hearts don't change across centuries. Their bodies rest together now in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. the same city where they met, loved, lost everything. Their tomb is Gothic romance made real, carved stone figures lying side by side, finally reunited after centuries of separation. It wasn't always this way. Their bones were moved multiple times over the years, scattered by revolutions and wars. But somehow people kept track, kept caring, kept believing these lovers belonged together. In 1817, they were moved to Père Lachaise permanently. Death granted them what life had denied, eternal proximity. Lovers travel from across the world to visit their grave. They leave letters, flowers, wedding rings. The tomb is covered with love notes in dozens of languages. People write about their own heartbreak, their own impossible loves, their own struggles between desire and duty. They ask Heloise and Abelard for intercession, as if these medieval lovers have become patron saints of complicated relationships. And maybe they have. Maybe when love feels too big for the world you're living in, you need proof that others have survived that feeling. Their grave provides that proof, one letter at a time. What strikes you, reading their story now, is how familiar their struggles feel. The tension between passion and propriety, the weight of other people's expectations, the question of whether love justifies sacrifice, or whether sacrifice transforms love into something else entirely. Heloise wrestling with desires she can't pray away. That's not a medieval problem. That's Tuesday afternoon for half the people listening tonight. Abelard trying to redirect earthly love toward heavenly purpose. People are having that exact conversation in therapy sessions across the country. Hearts don't change, only circumstances do. Their letters ask questions we're still answering. Should love conform to social expectations, or should society make room for love? Is it better to want someone completely and lose them, or never to want anyone that much at all? Can spiritual devotion coexist with earthly passion, or must you choose one? Heloise chose passion, even in a nun's habit. Abelard chose spirituality, even while remembering pleasure. Neither choice was wrong, neither was sufficient. That tension, that's what makes us human. What makes love complicated and necessary, and worth all the trouble it brings. Tonight, as Paris sleeps around their tomb, their legacy continues. Someone somewhere is writing a love letter that feels too intense to send. Someone is choosing between security and passion. Someone is wondering if the heart wants what it wants, or if wants can be trained toward wisdom. Heloise and Abelard don't provide easy answers. They provide something better, proof that the questions are worth asking, proof that love, even when it destroys, even when it transforms you into someone you don't recognize, even when it demands everything, love is worth it. Their story echoes because it's true. Rest now, knowing that your own love stories, the successful ones, the heartbreaking ones, the complicated ones that don't fit neat categories, they matter. They join a conversation that started before history began recording it, carried forward by voices like Heloise's, refusing to pretend the heart is simple. Sleep well, accompanied by 900 years of lovers who faced the same beautiful, impossible questions you're facing. Their letters survive. Your feelings matter. Love endures in all its forms across all centuries. Dream peacefully, knowing you're part of something eternal. Good night from Hearts and History.